In the early months of 1942, the skies over the Pacific were a death sentence for American fighter pilots. Every time a Grumman F-4F Wildcat encountered a Japanese Mitsubishi Zero, the outcome was brutally predictable. The Zero was faster, more agile, and deadly in the hands of seasoned Japanese pilots. For the American pilots who dared to turn and fight, the numbers were grim. 43 Wildcats had been lost in head-to-head engagements against Zeros by February of that year. Every one of those pilots had followed their training, turned into the enemy, and paid with their lives. Lieutenant Commander John Thatch, a veteran pilot with over 200 hours in the cockpit of a Wildcat, had watched these grim statistics mount with increasing frustration. Despite his experience, he had yet to score a single kill against the Zero, but more than anything, he was tired of burying his fellow aviators. Thatch was in command of Fighting Squadron 3, just 4 Wildcats under his leadership at the time, each one carrying a man who trusted him to find a way home. Yet there was no answer in the manual, no tactic in the Navy's playbook that could counter the Japanese fighters' advantages in climb rate and turn radius. One evening, back at Naval Air Station San Diego, Thatch found himself staring at a pack of wooden matches sent by his wife. They weren't just idle souvenirs, they became a vehicle for tactical imagination. He picked up 2 matches and began moving them back and forth, crossing paths repeatedly without colliding. The movement was elegant, almost rhythmic, and in that moment something sparked. What if, he wondered, 2 planes flew not alone but as a pair, weaving across each other's paths? The enemy might chase one but would be exposed to the guns of the other. It was a radical thought. Air combat doctrine dictated independence, each pilot maneuvering solo in dogfights. Pairing up in combat and flying into each other's paths was considered suicidal. But Thatch had seen enough funerals. He had no desire to follow the rules if they led only to death. He summoned his wingman, Lieutenant Edward O'Hare, showed him the matchsticks, and explained the idea. O'Hare looked at the model in silence before asking the only question that mattered: when do we try it? 4 days later, the time came. Thatch and 3 other pilots found themselves above Wake Island with 6 Zeros diving toward them. The math was daunting: 6 Japanese fighters against 4 American ones. Standard doctrine said to split up and fight solo. Instead, Thatch issued a new command: pair up and weave. He turned his Wildcat toward his wingman, Lieutenant Edward Bassett. Bassett turned toward him. As they crossed paths in the air, the Zeros closed in. 1 Zero locked onto Bassett and moved in for the kill, but as Bassett continued flying directly toward Thatch, the pursuing Zero flew into Thatch's gun range. Thatch opened fire, and the Zero was forced to break off to avoid being shredded by machine gun fire. The rest of the Japanese fighters scattered, confused by this unheard-of tactic. When Sheedy and Coulson, the other 2 pilots in the formation, saw what had happened, they began their own weave. Again, the Zeros were thrown off, disengaging instead of pressing the attack. All 4 Wildcats returned from the fight unscathed. Not a single one was hit. Thatch had tested his theory in the fire of combat, and it had worked. He immediately filed a report recommending that the maneuver be adopted across the Navy. The official response? Interesting tactic, needs further testing. Despite the clear success, the Navy clung to its doctrine, but Thatch knew the weave was the only way forward. Over the next few months, as the Battle of Midway approached, he trained his squadron to perform the weave with precision. Morning, noon, and night, they practiced crossing paths, turning toward one another, and making the weave muscle memory. By the time Midway arrived, Thatch's squadron was ready, even if the rest of the Navy was not. On June 4, 1942, as Japanese forces launched their attack, Thatch and his pilots were in the air over the carrier Yorktown. 12 Zeros approached. Thatch called the weave. The maneuver worked again, with the Zeros unable to pin down a single Wildcat. Thatch even found himself alone at one point, separated from his wingman, yet he adapted the weave for solo use, making sharp directional reversals that threw the Zero pilots off balance and drained their energy. Even alone, he survived. News of the maneuver spread fast. By June 6th, 32 pilots knew how to execute the weave. Other squadrons asked Thatch to teach them. By June 10th, Thatch's squadron faced 14 Zeros and shot down 3 without losing a single plane. For the first time, the kill-to-loss ratio against the Zero was in favor of the Americans. Still, official approval lagged, but it couldn't be denied for long. When Thatch briefed Admiral Chester Nimitz and other high command leaders, he didn't rely on emotion. He brought data, kill ratios, survival stats, diagrams. But while Thatch was advocating the tactic, the Japanese had already begun crafting a counter. On June 23rd, his squadron was attacked over Santa Cruz Island by a coordinated formation of 18 Zeros, attacking from 3 directions to break the weave. At first, the American formation faltered, but Thatch's calm voice over the radio reformed the pattern. His pilots executed the weave under fire, and once again they emerged victorious. 5 Zeros down, no American losses. Finally, the Navy acknowledged the tactic's value. On June 29, 1942, Admiral Ernest King issued Fleet Order 41-1942. The Thach Weave was now official U.S. Navy doctrine. All fighter pilots in the Pacific Fleet were to be trained in its execution immediately. But the most vivid proof of its value came on July 7th at Guadalcanal. 12 Wildcats from 6 squadrons were on patrol. 4 pilots had trained on the Weave, 8 had not. When 32 Zeros attacked, those who didn't use the Weave were decimated. 6 were shot down. The 4 who used the Weave survived and claimed 7 Zero kills. In the months that followed, Thatch devoted himself to teaching. He trained over 800 aviators in the Weave. It spread to the U.S. Army Air Force, to Marine Corps, and even across the Atlantic to British Royal Navy carriers. By late 1942, the American kill-to-loss ratio against the Zero had improved from less than 0.5 to over 2-to-1. The tactic had changed the war in the Pacific. When he was finally pulled from combat duty in 1943, Thatch was made an instructor and later a rear admiral. He hated being away from the front, but he understood his impact was greater in the classroom than in the cockpit. The tactic he developed with 2 matchsticks became foundational. Even during the Korean War, F-9F Panther pilots used it. During Vietnam, F-4 Phantom pilots adapted it under the name Fluid 4. The principle stayed the same: 2 aircraft turning toward each other to defend one another, protecting lives through coordination, not chaos. Thatch retired in 1973 as a 4-star admiral. He had flown 73 combat missions, scored 6 kills, and earned numerous medals. But what mattered most to him was the number of lives saved. Over 2,000 American pilots survived because of the Thach Weave. He spent the remainder of his life in San Diego, largely out of the spotlight. When reporters asked about his invention, he gave credit to necessity, not brilliance. "It wasn't genius," he often said. "It was desperation. I just wanted my boys to come home." After his death in 2001, over 300 naval aviators attended his funeral. Today, every naval aviator who earns their wings passes a plaque at Thatch Hall in Pensacola bearing his name and 3 words: innovate, adapt, survive. And in a glass case beneath that plaque sits the original pack of matches that sparked it all.